Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you may be. My name is Sin and I'm representing Metta Center. Welcome to the Metta Convention, Developing Compassion, Deepening Wisdom. So I'll be one of the MCs for today's event. But before we start, we usually have a tradition of demonstrating our respect for the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today. So where I am right now is the Venerable country. So let us pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our first speaker of today, who does not actually need an introduction. So the one and only Venerable Robina Courtin. So the topic, your topic is the workshop is in the mind. So I'm not going to read out every single speaker's bio for today because of time constraints. I hope that's okay with you. So what I'm going to do is I'll put all the relevant information and websites and so on into the chats. And Venerable Robina, over to you. We would like to kindly invite you to do a short blessing to open the conference.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sin, and thank you, everybody, all you Australians. Happy to see you all. I'm in New York City. It's spring just here, little blossoms out my window, so it's a nice thought. Whereas in Australia, you're moving towards the winter, isn't it? I'm very happy to be here. Always happy to do things in Australia. So I think just to start with the Tibetans would call it a motivation. We just think we're going to be here together. I think 7 different people talking today for 6 hours, all variations on the same theme, of course, the Buddhist approach to life. And we think, well, why are we listening to this? What's the point? And including me, I'm listening as well, is so that we can take some tools from all of this, even if I like to say you can be a 1% Buddhist, So hear it as advice. And if there's something that's useful, then think, great, I'm going to put that into practice. That's much more powerful than having a clever head full of knowledge and going blah, blah, but not doing anything, right? So we just think we're going to listen to this information from these different people to take some tools from it to help us develop our amazing potential. Tibetans have this nice saying, a bird needs 2 wings, wisdom and compassion. So, take some tools from this to develop our own amazing potential so that we can then help others, because we're all in the same boat. We're all in this world together, So that's our little motivation. That's it. No need for anything else, I think. So, okay, workshop is in the mind. I think that's a quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of my teachers, my main teacher. And it's a really tasty way to put it, because we're so clever in our modern world. We workshop here and workshop there, and we're brilliant with external knowledge and brilliant with scientific knowledge. But we sometimes have very little knowledge, not even awareness of what in the name of heaven is happening in our mind, And I think because, if we take Lord Buddha's teaching, we know very well that Lord Buddha is telling us that what goes on in our mind is the main player in our lives. So we need to be reminded of that, But it's very hard because we're all addicted to the samsaric view. We're all literally samsarists, aren't we? And we can be forgiven for that because, from the second we wake up in the morning, think about it, until the second we go to sleep, what are we paying attention to? Everything necessarily goes outside. All our attention, all our intelligence, all our clarity, all our good memory goes to the outside world, because that world dominates us. That's the world of the 5 senses, isn't it? And then because we live in a culture that the philosophy of which is that the outside world is the main source of our happiness and suffering. So it kind of reinforces the Buddha's view that we're all living in samsara. We've got the wrong end of the stick, basically. So we can be forgiven for believing the chocolate cake and the handsome new boyfriend are the source of our happiness, and then the source of our pain when we have too much of the cake and the boyfriend changes his mind and chucks me out for a younger version. So we are very addicted to the outside world. This is really clear. So we know that it takes immense effort to kind of reverse that, which of course is why, Lord Buddha has these marvelous techniques called meditation. I remember it was the Dalai Lama who said, it was these amazing Indians well before the Buddha, 3,000 years ago, who were the ones who began the investigation, into the nature of self. And we know that that's Buddha's expertise. So I think it's so important too to keep it on the earth. So the workshop is in the mind, meaning what goes on in our mind is what we must learn to pay attention to. So as we well know from Buddha's view of the mind, we've got the neurotic, unhappy states of mind, attachment, anger, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem, all rooted in the primordial misconception about a concrete self. And they're the ones, he says very clearly, are the main source of our pain. And then, of course, they're the source of why we make a mess of our lives and harm other people. I mean, look at the world. You don't go around killing and stealing because you love people. It's because of attachment and anger. I mean, it's fairly evident, you know. I mean, I think in modern psychology, we give all these fancy words, but I mean, the Buddha's view hasn't changed in 2,500 years. His words are so practical, and the words we know we are very familiar with those unhappy states of mind. So the Buddha would say they're the source of our pain. And then he says that the positive states, even forget about getting to nirvana, forget that, you know, just even learning to become a relatively happy, content, fulfilled person. We need to learn to distinguish. This is the key job, actually. We need to learn to distinguish between all the unhappy, miserable, neurotic, I-based states of mind, attachment, emotional hunger, neediness, expectation, possessiveness, jealousy, depression. I mean, we know these words intimately. And then we need to distinguish between those and the positive states. I mean, forget about selflessness, forget about nirvana, you know, just look at ordinary life. And if we can learn to distinguish between those neurotic ones and then the arising of the other ones, and then learn to cultivate those ones like love, compassion, kindness, perseverance, forgiveness, patience, it's a really proactive job, you know. I mean, it's not a joke. I like to say that Buddha is your best cognitive behavioral therapist. And that's not insulting Buddha. It's elevating cognitive therapy, I tell you, because his main focus, why you want to learn to be mindful, we know this, is so that you can pay attention to what's happening in your mind, not just to make it all go away and have a nice feeling, but so you can learn during your day-to-day life. I mean, after you get off your cushion and you go downstairs and there's the hubby slurping his coffee or the kid's not doing what you want, that's when the application of your mindfulness kicks in and you start to notice the annoyance, the irritation, the upset in your mind. This is practical stuff, you know. One of our biggest mistakes, I think, when we hear Buddhism, we kind of put it in the religious realm, not in the life realm, but it's totally to be applied, you know, in daily life. I mean, 99% of us will not go up to the mountains and give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or go to the forest and get realizations. So we have to have a daily morning practice, even for 5 minutes, simply watching our breath, being mindful, and developing the habit. And I think this is how you apply it in daily life. You develop the habit which you bring to bear at the kitchen sink, on the road, on the freeway, where you don't just pay attention and notice the husband and, you know, slurping his tea, or the traffic doing what you don't want, but you begin to notice what is happening inside here before it vomits out the mouth. My sense is this is one of our biggest problems in our culture, in modern culture. We have very excellent therapists around who help us struggle with our daily lives. But I think our problem is we only go to get help with our problems when it's too late. And it's not really joking. I mean, it's sort of cliched, but it's really true. I always use the analogy of our wheels falling off. We know very well you don't go anywhere near your therapist or even begin to meditate sometimes until your wheels fall off. But no wheels on the road ever fall off because we have maintenance, because we notice the wheels wobbling. I mean, if you go to your therapist and say, well, I got a bit annoyed with my husband today, she will laugh at you and say, please go home and wait till you want to kill him before you come back. That's our problem with using spiritual practice or even just ordinary methods of knowing our minds. We need to learn to pay attention well before the problems start. I mean, I see it in classes. One of the commonest things people say is, what will I do when I'm angry with my husband? Well, that's like asking, what will I do when I'm 120 Ks on the freeway and the wheels are falling off? You don't wait till then. You don't ever wait till then. And wheels don't fall off because we take care of them before that. And that's the point. You don't wait till you're so upset that you want to kill your husband before you start working on your mind. Or you don't wait till you're so depressed that you are inert in bed and can't move before you notice you've got a problem. So the Buddha's marvelous skill really is to use it as maintenance. I mean, I'm not joking, but to say, even just again, like ordinary life, forget nirvana. If we use Buddha's skills to learn to be mindful, to notice what is going on in our daily life, not just on the cushion, then the real point is we're going to catch all these thousands of voices, these thousands of thoughts in there, well before they become emotional. Because once they become emotional, that's the wheels falling off, and it really is just too late, you know. And this is why it's so important, I think, to bring the Buddhist tools right down to earth, not to think of it as religion. We put it in the sky, and it's just really inappropriate. It's not the point. I mean, you know, Buddha's whole approach is we can learn to know our own minds intimately, so that we can learn to distinguish between the neurotic ones and the valid ones. Again, forget the long-term goal of Buddhahood or nirvana. This is just learning to be a sane, wise, reasonable, content person who then can be useful on this planet. I mean, this is already pretty powerful. And just because Buddha talks about nirvana all the time, we don't think it's insulting, but to talk about ordinary life. 90% of us, like I said, if we could use these tools well, we can be tremendously more beneficial in our lives and more content and more fulfilled, But to do this, we have to know the difference between these different categories of states of mind. The Buddha talks about the positive, virtuous ones and the negative, neurotic, deluded ones. So, of course, in modern psychology, we don't talk like that, but that's Buddha's deal. This is his point, that the unhappy ones are the source of our pain. So and this is the key point that Buddha's making, this is his really key point, that these neurotic states of mind are not at the core of our being. This is very surprising. It's quite shocking, in fact. I mean, ordinary psychological models, we talk about neuroscience and psychology. It's almost like a joke to say that you can get rid of all attachment and all anger and all depression. It almost sounds like you'd be half a human being. Because I think in our models, in a neuroscience as well, we just assume that anger and attachment and jealousy and depression and low self-esteem are normal parts of a normal person. We would like to be less neurotic, perhaps, but there's no view in neuroscience or psychology that suggests you can get anywhere near eradicating these states of mind. And that's exactly what Buddha's telling us. So if this is true, we better understand what he means, That means we need to learn to identify these states of mind, these crazy states of mind, So then that means we have to learn to know the 3 poisons. If anybody's read even one Buddhist book, you're going to come across the 3 poisons. So what are they? Let's get it on the earth. There's ignorance, which is this root, neurotic, mistaken sense of a self. Well, forget that one. Then the main voice of that is attachment. And effectively, the 4 Noble Truths, Buddha's telling us attachment is effectively the main source of our suffering, which is a big surprise, because it's not how we think of attachment. And then on the basis of attachment not getting what it wants, which is like a nice way to put it, then the 3rd one is called aversion. So then the volatile levels of aversion are called anger, the mild levels of aversion are called depression or annoyance or frustration. But these are the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So in a sense, the key one to understand is attachment, craving, all these different words. And we like to make it all kind of holy sounding, but really it's a very primordial neurotic state of mind. I'm sure Buddha would have liked the word neurotic. So what is it? Well, the key thing, I think, when we study the text, and they're the same, whether you study in Thailand or Burma or Tibet, the text, the source texts about the nature of mind, we all share these. They're the same, So what the Buddha is essentially telling us is that these unhappy states of mind, these afflictions, these neurotic states of mind, their key function, one function is that they're disturbing. They call them even disturbing emotions. Well, that's pretty evident. Check the last time you were depressed. You don't go, oh, wow, Robina, I was depressed yesterday and it was just great. No way in the world. It's painful. It's disturbing. But what's interesting, what's fascinating, and this is the really key point, and this is quite unique to the Buddha's take on the mind, that all these neuroses, another word for them is delusions. That's a really key word in English. It's a very good word in English. I know in French and Italian there's a bit weird, this word, but this really tells us the function of these neurotic states of mind and why they cause us suffering. And delusion is a great word. So yourself, if someone accuses you of being delusional, you're very offended because they're telling you you're not in touch with reality. And I'm telling you, that's bullseye for the Buddha. That's exactly what he's saying. The degree to which we're caught up in attachment, anger, depression, jealousy, forget the deepest delusion, forget, the subtle one about the self, forget that. The key thing is they're causing us to not be in touch with reality. So the general function of all these unhappy states of mind, these afflictions, is that they exaggerate. Deep in our bones, they're coming from being conceptual stories, but because they're so habitual, we only experience them emotionally, So when attachment is there, fully developed, there's a feel, its deepest energy is dissatisfaction. We just somehow feel I do not have enough. Or even when it's more primordial, and this is very common in the West, in the modern world, we feel that I am not enough. This deep feeling of sort of even what we call self-hate. This is this deepest dissatisfaction. No matter what we achieve, no matter what we get, no matter what we do, no matter what we have, this is default assumption. We run to it. There's no analysis. We just run to it. It's not enough. It's not enough. So, of course, if you don't feel you have enough, or you don't feel you are good enough, this feeling of dissatisfaction, next step that it gives rise to, and this is the other aspect of attachment, is then emotional hunger, hankering after something. So the obvious level of attachment, and Buddha spends a lot of time telling us about this, is to the objects of the five senses, which is why at the very first levels of practice, we know this, we learn to harness the energy of our senses. That's why we live in precepts. Buddha at least gets us to not, he gets us at least to harness the energy of the servants of our mind. That's an anger, attachment, jealousy. So we don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't jump on the wrong partner, and so on and so forth. He doesn't tell us don't eat 5 pieces of cake, but we can extrapolate once we learn to understand the mind, So attachment is the key one that we're trying to subdue. Why? And it's important to understand it because I'm not going to, like Lama Zopa says, when we hear that Buddha says, you're only going to be happy when you give up attachment, we get all depressed. Oh, I've got to give up my heart. I've got to give up my happiness. No, you're mistaken, really mistaken. When you give up attachment, you don't give up happiness. You get happiness. You become don't fantasize it. Don't make it all religious sounding. The person who's overwhelmed by attachment is distressed, anxious, neurotic, worried, never satisfied. But a person who's even a little bit less attached, what do you think the opposite is? You don't turn into nothing. You become more fulfilled, literally more content, more self-respectful, more, the way they say it in the West, more self-compassion. You become a better version of yourself, basically. So even though it's not explicit when Buddha talks about giving up suffering and its causes, what he's really saying is, develop happiness and its causes. So he's saying the more you give up attachment and anger and the fears and the neuroses, the more content and fulfilled you become. And again, don't hear that as like religion. It puts it in the sky somewhere. We're talking real life here, Who doesn't want to be more content, more fulfilled, less neurotic, more self-respectful? Of course we do. But putting in practical terms, that's what Buddhist methodology is about. Forget the long-term result, okay? That's going to come too eventually. But let's look at the ordinary day-to-day life. So important. So if attachment's the cause of the problem, we better learn to understand it. So it comes from being a conceptual state of mind that over-exaggerates. This is the key way these neuroses are delusional. What time is it? How are we going? 10 to. I'll ask you some questions soon. Okay. So I'll just say this, and we can have some questions. So attachment over-exaggerates. This is the basic point of all the afflictions. They over-exaggerate. So attachment over-exaggerates, embellishes the deliciousness of the chocolate cake, and aversion or anger over-exaggerates the ugliness of the ex-boyfriend. I mean, speaking simply, So we run between attachment and aversion 1,000 times a day. And we need to learn, like I said, to really recognize them before they become emotional. You need to recognize the anger before it vomits out the mouth. You need to recognize the attachment, and that's the hard part. Like I said, from the most practical point of view, that's the benefit of your mindfulness meditation. You start to notice your mind. You start to, and interesting, in one of the texts that we study where it describes the process of achieving shamatha, it was just described in terms of 9 stages, that a sign of success, even at the first of the 9, is that you think your mind's getting worse. Well, it's not, because what's happening is we're starting to, when we do our meditation every day, we're starting to notice the mind, and that's the skill. And so one of our biggest misconceptions is, oh, well, I do my mindfulness meditation, but I keep getting angry and I keep getting upset. Well, don't be surprised. Be happy that you're seeing your mind. This is the point. Don't be depressed because the thoughts are still there. It's beyond naive to think when you start to meditate, all your thoughts will go away. I mean, that's just rubbish. One of the key benefits is we need to become familiar with what's happening in our mind. Because if the enemy is attachment and anger and jealousy and depression, you need to be able to listen to them. All these crazy, I use the example of all my roommates in my head, I need to learn to distinguish between the attachment roommate, the jealousy roommate, the anger roommate, the depressed one, and the love and the compassion and the kindness ones. That's the day-to-day application, I think. And then we can learn to be our own therapist, as one of my teachers says, not joking, and learn to navigate these crazy thoughts, and then begin to have the confidence to know that attachment and anger are not at the core of our being, that we can argue with them, and slowly we can change. We can mold our mind, as Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. So the key to it is why we want to do a bit of meditation every day, just for the day-to-day benefit, is to be able to become familiar with what on earth is going on inside us, and then learn to navigate it and not be afraid of it and not be fundamentalist and say, I'm a bad person, I shouldn't be thinking this way, blah, blah. We've got to be familiar with what's happening so we can learn to deal with it day to day, And because our mind is impermanent, thoughts are impermanent, delusions are impermanent, then we can have some confidence that they're not at the core of our being, and we can learn to change them, This is the practical day-to-day application of Lord Buddha's teachings, I would suggest. Forget nirvana, like I said, but already on the way to that, you can become a wise, fulfilled, content, and therefore compassionate and useful person on this planet, That'll do, Tina. Now get some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Okay. Good job.
Very direct and powerful teachings. Thank you. What a way to start the convention.
Good, darling. Any questions, Tina? Anybody?
Yeah, so I'm going to invite anyone who has any questions to please place it into the chat, and I will then facilitate the question answers. If you would like to keep your question anonymous, you can just send it to me directly. Then we'll, just as a start, very good that we need to understand our neuroses. How to deal with that when they are so strong.
I know, that's the trouble, isn't it?
I
think that's why it's important to have a bit of understanding theoretically of Buddha's teachings first, to give us the courage, because if we don't know that these strong tendencies are not intrinsic to us. Buddha's teachings are incredible about how these are not at the core of our being. And this is a big surprise. And this is quite a radical concept. Like I said before, for the neuroscientific models and for the world, it sounds weird to say that you can learn eventually to get rid of the neurotic states of mind. But this is what Buddha's saying. But that means to at least know they're not at the core of my being. That can give us courage not to become hopeless when they seem to be running the show. So, and also to know simply that they're impermanent. So because something is impermanent, it's not set in stone. So I think even theoretically knowing that and having confidence gives us courage to, okay, another wake-up call, there I am again, shouting at the kids or bad-mouthing the husband, and you can go back to basics, you can make your decision, you do your practice, and then, and the other answer to this, and this is quite powerful, Buddha's very first level of practice is to control the mouth, control the body. Don't worry about the mind. If you can make a vow that morning to shut your mouth, and because you make a decision, you'll be successful. At least the words don't come out the mouth. That's pretty powerful already, I tell you. There's a nice saying in Tibet: when you're with others, you watch your body and your speech, but when you're on your own, you can then watch your mind. And that's a good technique.
And on that note, also the mind, the self-talk can also be very problematic as well. So how to deal with that?
You mean the putting ourselves down kind of talk, you mean?
Yeah,
I think that's the irony of ego, isn't it? We love to hate ourselves, we're always chatting away. And I think the bigger voices in our head are the negative ones. I'm not enough, and I haven't got enough, and the negative, and the fear, and the jealousy, and the anxiety. So, there's another practical approach to that. That's why I use the analogy of my roommates. And I think the negative roommates kind of run the show in here. You've got to consciously bring out the good roommate. Sometimes just having a positive thought and saying, it's okay, Robina, it's all right, dear, you're doing better. You're doing okay, one step at a time. Being a little bit positive, bringing out the positive roommates. I think they're hiding under the bed and in the wardrobe, Bring the positive thoughts out and argue with the negative ones. It's a very practical approach. It's like I never met a person yet who says, Robina, I can't stop having good thoughts. It's always the neurotic ones,
Yes.
But we let them loom large. We're not only those, we're all of them. And we've got to really be more reasonable with ourselves, I think that's important.
And being a friend to ourselves as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a nice, simple, very humble way of putting it. It really is true. The irony of ego is we almost think it's a virtue to criticize ourselves all the time. It's not appropriate. We'll exhaust ourselves doing that. We have to have a bit more self-confidence, which comes with humility, actually. It's not arrogant at all.
Beautiful. And related to that, we've got a question from the audience. How do we overcome the ruminations?
Well, we know from Buddha's teachings, that it takes time. We've got to have that long-term view. We've got to, I mean, it's really not a joke to say we have to have a long-term view, that all the techniques are there. Lord Buddha's got these amazing techniques. I mean, many of this comes from these genius Indians before him. We know that, but they're all there. They're tried and tested techniques, and that should give us confidence. Just like, you know, there are techniques when you go to the gym. It might take you 1 year, but if you apply those techniques, you will change your body. We're prepared to be patient with the body, you know, but not with our mind. We're so against ourselves, and we're so impatient. We've got to know we've got the methodology, the techniques are there, and if you trust Buddha's techniques, you apply them, slowly the results come. We've got to have patience and humility, and perseverance, but confidence in the techniques. Don't just make up our own trip. I think it's part of the problem. People think religion, well, I can think what I like. It's insulting. Buddha's got very specific techniques. So you go to the source, you go to the experts, and you apply the techniques and have patience, you know. It's really
very
important.
good. Yes, very good. And on that topic about techniques, here's another question from the audience. As an entry point to observing neurosis, do you recommend samatha, vipassana, or precepts?
I think precepts is, in a way, I mean, I think the precepts really, I think we really should look more at the benefit psychologically of that. Buddha doesn't use the term psychology. He didn't speak Greek, for God's sake, but we can easily see it as religious, talking about taking a precept as some kind of, but actually to learn anything, like, you know, you drive a car, you think, how many precepts do you take? You probably vow to not do 100 different things. And you know you have to learn that. And why are you learning to know, don't do this and don't do that and don't do this? Because you want to turn into a really good car driver. Well, why do we want to take precepts? To control our body and speech. And the Buddha loves his precepts. He thinks they're the most powerful thing. You know, even I think in some of the texts, they say that precepts or vows are like this subtle energy visible to clairvoyance. It sounds pretty hippie, but there's something very powerful about precepts, and I would say it's psychologically. You know yourself, when you really decide to do something, you will do it. So controlling our body and speech, not killing, not lying, not stealing, isn't just some religious trip. It's powerful, and in harnessing, like I like to say, the servants of our mind. If you're really harnessing your body and speech and having a disciplined practice every day, just keeping your precepts, then you have the luxury after that to start working on your mind and doing your meditation. If you're out of control and shout and yell every day, you can sit and watch your mind till the cows come home. Nothing much will change. So and that's the first level of Buddha's teachings: body and speech first, behavior first, then the mind, then meditation. But together, good recipe.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next question is this: what is the Buddhist definition of attachment? What is the difference between attachment and enjoying things, objects, people?
Exactly. It's a major thing we have to, if we don't understand it, we're in trouble.
Yes.
So this is the key thing, roughly speaking. The Buddha, when you study the Buddhist view of the mind, and it's the same text, like I said, we all study, you learn that there's different categories of states of mind, and there are the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous ones, and then the valid, virtuous ones. This is just speaking conventionally. And the key characteristic, like I said, about all the neurotic ones, and the major one is attachment, the afflictions, is that they exaggerate, they distort. So they're emotional, but underneath, deep and down underneath the emotion, and this is when you really get to see this, when you really learn to meditate a lot, you start to look beneath the emotion, and you're going to be seeing that it's actually a conceptual thought. They all come down to being conceptual thoughts, but because we practice them for so long, we only notice them when the body's involved, when they're super emotional, you know. But when we really become familiar, attachment basically is a conceptual thought that exaggerates the deliciousness of something. So that's the bare bones. And then it's got this emotional component. So the key one is it's dissatisfaction. Never thinking I've got enough. Then it's emotional hunger, always looking for something, thinking that when I get it, then I'll get satisfaction. Then it's the hankering after it, the manipulating to get it, the expectation of it, the possessing of it, and the over-exaggeration of the power of that chocolate cake or that boyfriend or that new handbag or whatever to bring me happiness. It's multifaceted attachment, and it's not kindness and being close to your family like we use it. It's not the word happiness. It's not the word love. I mean, love is a delight in someone else being happy. It's a virtue. It makes you happy and it helps others. Love is connected to others. Love is a happy state of mind, but attachment poisons it, but we can't tell the difference. Attachment is emotional hunger, manipulation, it's based in fear, it's totally I-based, but it's really sneaky because you can't see it. It's under the guise of love, but it's got nothing to do with love. It's like one is poison and one is medicine, you know. So unless we understand theoretically even the difference, it's very hard to track it. But it's the source of pain. And the attachment that Buddha's talking about is this one I just talked about, not that, oh, I'm close to she's very close to her children. She's attached to her family. That's a different kettle of fish. That's another way we use in modern psychology about being close to somebody. That's wonderful. Nothing wrong with that. So we shouldn't chuck the baby out with the bathwater. Attachment is neediness, expectation. I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I'm never got enough. It's this deep, painful emotion inside us. That's attachment. I think we all recognize it.
Very good. Now, you may have already answered this next question, but to honour the question and the person who has asked it, this is it. What are the characteristics of a neurotic mind and a neurotic thought?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I just use that word neurotic. I'm sure Buddha would have liked it, you know, but he didn't speak Greek, did he? All our fancy words are always in Greek, you know. These are, I mean, I don't know what the term but I know that the word from Tibetan we translate, and I'm sure it's the same from the Sanskrit, is affliction. Buddha talks about he talks about negative states of mind and positive ones. It's very simple. So the negative ones are attachment, and then when attachment doesn't get what it wants, anger, and then pride, arrogance, low self-esteem, jealousy. I mean, there's a half a dozen we all recognize. And their key function is they exaggerate, they distort, but the really basic one is they're totally I-based. And this is very uncomfortable talking, like if we relate this to modern psychology, it sounds very bit sort of religious, but they're all neurotic. If you have a person who's mainly attached and angry and jealous and depressed, they're totally a self-centered person. It's not being negative, it's just we need to observe it. But if you're mainly having love and compassion and kindness and forgiveness, you're an easygoing, you're kind, you're relaxed, you're fulfilled, and you make everyone else happy, you know. So the key function of the neurotic ones is they make you miserable. It's so clear. And then the positive ones make you happy. This is just talking ordinary state of mind, ordinary states of mind, you know. The more attached and angry and jealous and depressed and low self-esteem and anxious and worried we are, the more miserable we are. It's so clear, but it's not blaming us. We need to learn to identify these. Sure, there are things in the external world that trigger those states of mind, but our problem in the West is we think the external world is the main cause of these states of mind. No, absolutely not. The Buddha says they're habits inside our mind we brought with us, you know. So that's why we have to learn to distinguish between these unhappy, I-based, tense, anxious, kind of tight states of mind. But it's hard to get to them, you know, and then we have to distinguish them between love and compassion and kindness. So if we really wanted to look at attachment and love, they're utterly, completely different states of mind. But we're so used to having them together, it's as if they're one flavor, you know. But attachment is, like I said, is the needy, I-based, neurotic, low self-esteem voice that always assumes I can get happiness if I get that person, and then is hungry for that person's approval, not to mention hungry for the attachment objects. So it's very unhappy emotionally, attachment. Whereas love is a delight in someone else's happiness. It's very relaxed, it's easygoing, it's interconnected to others, it's related to compassion. They're completely different. And this is not the way we tend to think in modern psychology. So we really need to look carefully at these states of mind and don't just hear them as religion. You know, it's really important. I mean, Buddha's expertise really was the workings of the mind. He was extraordinary in his, I mean, when you read the text, they're amazing, the analysis that's given. Then we need to understand these, you know, so we can then see ourselves more clearly. The unhappy states of mind, attachment, anger, and the rest, they're the source of our pain. And we can get rid of them. This is what Buddha's telling us. It's pretty amazing.
Very good. Thank you. Next question. Okay. I already have an altar at home and try to follow the precepts. Most days I retake refuge and meditate. Years ago, I even took refuge and precepts at the FPMT Centre in Santa Fe. But how can I now start practicing Tibetan Buddhism properly? What's next?
Well, I mean, Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, whatever Buddhism you like, in the end, it's, you know, the stages of practice. And I think all the, you know, this analogy, the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, if you like, you've got the bodhisattva path, but forget that one. The teachings are the same wherever you go, Thailand, Burma, Tibet, and they're presented differently. Maybe there's variations on the theme, but they're all the basic teachings we all share from Lord Buddha, you know, about first you control your body, you control your speech, you live in the precepts, you harness your crazy energy, you then go to the second level of practice and you begin to practice a bit of shamatha, you learn to know your mind. I mean, there's the same same teachings, So if you wanted Tibetan Buddhist teachings, I mean, if you talk about that center in Santa Fe, they've got I was there for a couple of years during the pandemic. They've got a really excellent program. All the teachings are available on Zoom. But I think anyway, whatever you want to study, you need to have your own daily practice, and you need to listen to the teachings. I mean, it's not just sitting watching your breath. That's not being a Buddhist. Anyone can do that. You need to understand the background, Buddha's analysis of the view, analysis of the mind, analysis of impermanence. It's very powerful, I think, to hear the teachings. It can really enrich our practice. So I think go right back to that center, go on their website, and they've got a really good program. They have every single day at least 4 or 5 things. They have morning meditations, evening meditations. There's plenty there. So go back to their website and you'll find everything you want, darling.
Excellent. Speaking of daily practice, here's the next question. How can we remind ourselves to stay mindful during a busy day?
Well, it's like asking, how can I stay mindful of to put the foot on the brake when I'm on the freeway when the traffic is going at 120 k's an hour? It's practice, honey. It's got to practice. Practice. There's no quick fix. It's just learning to practice. And that's having confidence in the methodology, confidence in the techniques. It's like you've got to have that confidence and have confidence that the techniques you're being taught are reasonable. Now, if you only practice them once a month, obviously you can't drive on the freeway. You're going to get crashed. So the more you learn the techniques, the more you have confidence in them, and the more you do them every day, the more you can apply them when in the middle of the day. And that just takes time. It just takes time. But the Tibetans have a nice way of putting, we say practice makes perfect. And there's a very nice way to put it. They say nothing ever gets more difficult with practice. So have confidence, practice every day, and know your skills, know your capability, know what you can handle. If you can only drive on the back roads, and stick to the back roads. But if you can handle 6-lane freeways at 120 k's an hour, then go for it. So you have to know your capability, know what you can handle, and then you keep moving and learn from your experience. That's
excellent analogy. I really love that. I'm going to remember that one for sure. Next one. How can we soothe the nervous system and give more energy to skillful states instead of the opposite?
Oh, sweethearts, I know that's difficult. Soothe the nervous system. What a nice way to put it. I mean, we also, because we're trying to be good practitioners, don't get too fundamentalist and think you're not supposed to relax. And I know one great meditator, I knew a yogi meditator in the mountains for years and years. And this is the skill of any meditator. They say when you really meditate, when you meditate and do your practice, you really do your practice. And when you relax, you really relax. But we tend to think, well, relaxing means, I can go and have sex, drugs and rock and roll. I'm allowed to have it because I need to relax. There's other ways of relaxing. You still control your body and speech and mind, still live within your precepts, but there's a way of relaxing, relax, walk, look at the sky, go see the bush, try to not be totally involved in your thoughts day and night. There are practical, skillful methods of utilizing the world to help you relax. A good sleep sometimes. If you can't handle stuff, go to sleep. At least then you don't do any harm to anybody else, But and then try to harness the energy of the crazy thoughts. This is a really tough one because we give them such power, don't we? And we assume because they're there, they're speaking the truth to us, but they're not. They're a load of rubbish. So it's sort of one of the things is to really develop this skill when to help relax your mind. Because the nature of the negative thoughts is they're always finding fault, and of course you're their favorite. We always find fault in ourselves. So then learn to kind of counteract it. It sounds so corny, but when you hear yourself not enough, I'm not doing enough, I didn't get enough, you say a positive word. I'm not kidding. But the moment you just say a nice positive thought, you rejoice, give it a break, Robina, you're doing okay, honey, it's all right. That calms your nervous system down. It's your nervous system is jangled when we always have the negative thoughts. So do friendly, easygoing things, and in your mind, try to bring out some of the virtues from under the wardrobe and in the under the mattress, and say that's the positive thoughts. But we have to remember to say positive thoughts. The negative ones don't need reminding. You've got to remind yourself because we are doing okay. We need to learn to be satisfied. We need to learn to be content. We need to learn to be a little bit fulfilled and feel we're doing okay instead of always default, I'm never doing enough. This is very exhausting, Be kind to ourselves. So important.
Very much so. Why do you think why is there that tendency towards being unkind to ourselves and the negative thoughts?
Well, the answer is a bit disappointing. It's like asking why every time I go to the piano, do I always play the wrong notes? It's because you haven't practiced enough. That's all. It's because we've obviously practiced the negative thoughts more than the positive. You'd have to say that. Otherwise, the positive ones be popping up. I mean, there are some people that I know. There's one person I know who, she just is one of those people who seems always perky and happy. And you can't, I mean, that's powerful. It means she's obviously got the tendency to go towards the positive rather than the negative. Even when she was very sick at one time, you would hardly even have known it. She found a learning in it. She's always thinking of other people, not like running around like Pollyanna being goody-goody. You can't, not like that. But she obviously had a strong tendency from having practiced the positive thoughts that they're the ones that came up more easily. So, slowly, we can all be like that.
Very good. Yep. And the next one, do you have any advice for letting go and moving on from past negative experiences or traumas and forgiving people?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it, when we're harmed by others? Well, the part of the thing with trauma, I think, trauma by definition, my feeling is trauma, we use the word trauma when a bad thing happened and we couldn't handle it at the time. So what we do is we suffocate it. Isn't it? We don't deal with it. And of course, if we're a child, it's very hard to know how to deal with some abuse, let's say, because you're not equipped for it. So what we do is we put it behind. And that's what we talk about trauma. Whereas if a bad thing can happen, like say now as we're adults, and you can handle it at the time, meaning confront it, hear it, see it, deal with it, find your own, then you can walk past it. It won't be trauma anymore. This is easy to say, but very hard to do. So I think one of the big things is, especially when it's say like violence and maybe even sexual violence, especially against us, because there's so much neurosis around sexual violence. It's shocking, that there's so much shame and guilt and we can't even begin to look at it. So it's very easy to hide it all away, but you can't hide it. You cannot hide it. I think one of the things in Buddhist psychology is there's nothing we've ever seen or heard or tasted or touched or smelt or even thought of that goes astray. Everything's stored in our mind, So we need to learn. I mean, if we're trying to deal with the past, we need good support. If you can't handle it on your own, get good support, a person whom you can trust, so you can delve into this and bring it up. Because one of the most powerful ways, I think, to get rid of trauma is to confront the thing, to look at it, to see it, which we've not been able to do. And if you need support to do that, get support. But if you can, in your own way, learn to look at that thing, and then eventually, when you're ready, especially if there's guilt there, forgive yourself, because there's no reason to have guilt. It's so terrible. We put it on ourselves. And eventually, when you're brave enough and you're feeling strong enough, you can eventually forgive the other person. But that comes later. Don't force that side. You have to learn to deal with it in yourself first. And we've all got different methods. Some people can do it on their own. Some people need a therapist. But we need to deal with it. There's no benefit in putting everything away. There's no benefit in building it up. And that just becomes, neurotic and angry and depression. And there's no benefit in that at all, But of course, if we have the view of karma and a very strong confidence in karma, and if that's part of your culture, and we're learning it in our culture, we're learning it, then you can learn to really have forgiveness. I always like to tell the story of these young Tibetan nuns. I'll finish with this because my time is up, I think. These young Tibetan nuns, I remember in 2003, Richard Gere invited His Holiness the Dalai Lama to New York, and he invited 20 former prisoners and some people like me who are working with people in prison. I was running a non-profit dealing with people in prison. So it was a very moving day, about 20 Americans, black, white, Puerto Rican, male, female, whatever, all dealing with their sufferings in prison and blah, 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 who'd done some kind of meditation in prison. And he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns, So these young women, they were young, they'd been sexually abused and tortured in prison in Tibet, and they were talking about their suffering. Well, I think what was shocking to the Americans was these young women, probably their suffering was as bad as everybody else's. They didn't appear to be angry and fraught and freaking out and traumatized. Because for them in their culture, and like any Buddhist culture, karma is the natural view of the universe. I mean, us in the West, it's like a foreign language. But for them, in the same way that your mother made you, your father made you, and neuroscience is our natural thing, karma is theirs. It's been in Asia for 3,000 years, for God's sake, and for them, and certainly in Tibet where everybody was a Buddhist, it was a natural view of the universe. And because they have the view of karma very seriously, they know they brought their own mind with them, and they know they brought their own experiences with them, including their happy experiences, but including their suffering ones. So they were discussing this, and one of the nuns was sort of quiet but sad, no tears, And then she said at the end, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past, but crucially because we know they will suffer in the future. I mean, I don't know how much people study karma, but I know from the first moment I met the Buddhist teachings, karma for me was one of the most powerful teachings as the basis of practice. It gives you an explanation for why things happen. And if you want to take that as your working hypothesis, that's up to you, but I certainly do. It explains why. And that's half the pain of our suffering is we don't know why things happen. So we freak out, you know. So this is very powerful learning, I think. That was very powerful. So when you can deal with your own trauma first, and then slowly, you can afford to have compassion, because we are all in the same boat, life after life, harming and being harmed. That's it, you know. I think it's a very powerful view. That's enough for me, I think.
Thank you so much, Venerable Robina. That was incredible. Great start to the day. Started out strong. It's been so wonderful to have your presence here. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand it over now to Sinsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, for facilitating the questions and answers session. And thank you so much, Venerable Robina. I echo what Tina said. I really like how you emphasize the importance of focusing on practice right here and now. And we need to take care of our mind now, well before the problem starts. And I think a lot of us are guilty of that quite often.
I know.
So thank you so much again. And before we move on to the next session and welcome the next speaker, Venerable Ayasoma, I just want to mention quickly, talk a little bit about Metta Center. So the Metta Center is a non-profit, non-sectarian organization pursuing charitable purposes such as social welfare and peace for the community and in the world. So we offer regular Dharma talks, for example, meditation, yoga, workshops, picnics, and so on, and support for the monastics as well as social activities. What we do is guided by the principles of the Buddha's teaching: do good, avoid evil, and purify the mind. And finally, all of our activities are free of charge, and we welcome any donation. So I've put the website in the chat if you want to find out more about Metta Center.